again, back on stage, Mr. Brad Templeton.
I'm really sorry to come up here and have we got some sound here?
Sound.
Yeah? I'm really sorry to come up here and give you a nightmare now that you've just described that. Now, I hope Cadbury doesn't sell ladyfingers. That would be bad.
That would be terrible, yeah.
But actually, I'm told that to buy a car in Norway, you don't need 2 fingers, you need an arm and a leg.
Correct. And 2 salaries.
And two salaries. Actually, I don't speak any Norwegian, but I'm going to greet you in Norwegian. Hey. And I'm told it's an absolutely amazing word which means both hello and goodbye, and I think we need to sit down and talk about our relationship and a lot of other powerful meanings. The only word in English that matches it is dude. So. But I'm here not for that, but to talk about the marriage of computers and cars, and we're going to be much more concrete about AI than we were this morning, talking about all sorts of abstract concepts. This is something that's coming now that's here in some ways, and is really going to change areas of the world that you'll be surprised to see. Areas that you wouldn't have thought were connected with transportation, but are going to see massive change. Now, I'm going to look at pillars like saving lives and energy and oil, which is of some interest here in Norway. Look at cities and how they're shaped, and parking, and what governments are doing, and what all the car companies and other players are doing, and what future that paints for us. And the beginning is going to be with saving lives. And in fact, all the people who are working on this is their prime goal. You may say, oh, it's going to take a lot of jobs from taxi drivers. Anyone in the room, when you were young, you dreamed of always growing up and being a taxi driver? Okay. So it's not the same class of job, and in fact what people are focusing on is, can we do this? Can we make it drive safer than a human being and save lives? Well, human beings don't drive tremendously well, right? Every year around the world we're killing 1.2 million people. This is like one of the world's grandest diseases in terms of the amount of death that's going on, and to young people. Now if you dig into the United States, the death toll there is about 34,000 to 35,000 people, but the American Safety Agency said that costs the United States $870 billion. And I worked that out to being about 29 cents a mile, or 16 euro cents a kilometer, which is more than the benzene in your Hummer. Right? You're spending more for your share of the cost of accidents than for the fuel. Now, on top of that, Americans spend 50 billion hours every year doing this. Are you excited yet? 50 billion hours manipulating steering wheels. And we heard, actually, in the presentation this morning, the total labor output, the entire productive labor output of the United States is in the realm of, was 190 a few years ago. It's now, actually, other figures I have, close to 240 billion hours. But that's the entire productive output of the United States, 50 billion hours of it going into turning steering wheels for whatever feeling we're seeking. Now over here, you actually have a much nicer story to tell. Only around 200 deaths on Norwegian highways from car crashes. That's very good. It's about 60% of the rate of the Americans per kilometer. And generally, the northern European countries do very well. If you want to die in Europe, I recommend you go to Roma, where it's very easy to do so. Now, 40% of these fatalities involve alcohol. Now, robots very rarely drink. You've got to give them that. This Mexican robot is an exception, and so there's a chance to make things happen. We've also given over our cities to cars in ways that we've become blind. We talked about the parking spaces. 25% of the energy budget of the rich countries is going towards cars, a lot of it with Norwegian oil. More than 25% of the greenhouse gases, and the whole human race is driving every year 1.7 light years. Do many of you use light years in your work? That's a unit of human activity, which is astounding to me. So this is not science fiction anymore. You may think it was from a movie, but that has changed. Things are changing fast. In Silicon Valley, we like to joke we're finally doing real garage innovation, because we have this image of the garage as where all Silicon Valley startups happen, and now they're actually doing work in garages. About 10 years ago, the US military did a series of contests to kickstart this going. The first contest was a total failure. Nobody got more than about 7 kilometers. My friend Anthony entered a motorcycle and he forgot to turn it on. But 18 months later, in 2005, a different story. 5 teams got cars that went empty 250 kilometers through the California desert. This is ancient history. This is 10 years ago, but these cars completed this course, and the winners of this contest from Stanford were joined with the winners of the next contest by Google to build the next generation of vehicle. This is Chris Urmson, another Canadian, must be smart, dragging the car through a drive near Google in Palo Alto, mixing in with other traffic and stopping at stoplights and making left turns and yielding as appropriate. And Google has thanked these people for participating in the research program, by the way. Now, the car does this by seeing in all directions, 3 dimensions all the time, not seeing the way a human being sees and not driving the way a human being drives. So they've been busily working out, testing hard things. Here's going through toll booths and the coast of California. And if you've been to San Francisco, you may have driven this little windy street called Lombard Street there, which is full of tourists. Merging onto a busy freeway, another very challenging thing. I like this project from Stanford where they taught the car to park in a way I don't recommend that you park, actually. But this, again, is the ancient history. And since then, not just Google, but many other companies, including most of the car companies, are in the game. In fact, the car company, which has actually announced the first date for real projects with real customers, is a Chinese car company that you may be familiar with, not too far from you. They're going to have 100 Volvo customers in their cars driving the ring road around Göteborg in Sweden next year in 2017, and another 100 in a Chinese city, and another 100 in London. Now, that's the earliest date from a car company, but all the other car companies have put out dates in this range, or going out to about 2020. BMW just said 2021. Now, do you have this car in Norway at all, the Tesla? No, I know it's actually very popular here because of the taxes. But of course, when Volvo, the Chinese company, said that gets a laugh when I say it in Sweden for some reason. I guess you guys don't laugh at the Swedes. But when they announced that they saw other companies announcing dates like 2017, Tesla put the autopilot function into their cars through a software upgrade last year. It's not a full self-driving car. It doesn't take you door to door. You have to pay attention to it. But the fact that it just showed up one morning was quite a remarkable thing for the customers of Teslas. Now, I will actually rate the car company that's the most advanced as Daimler. Daimler's been both showing off some fairly impressive demos, including types of door-to-door driving, making concept, or we've covered it over, but in the bottom right-hand corner are concept cars where the seats face each other, and also pledging that they're going to sell rides through their service. Do you know the Car2Go service that they have? It's very popular in German cities. Some of you will have seen it, where you can basically rent Daimler cars by the minute. That they were going to create a service called Car2Come, which comes to you. Now, they didn't test that name in the United States, where people will do nothing but giggle at it. But nonetheless, the fact that a big 150-year-old car company like Benz can think about this is actually a very positive sign for them. Not all the other companies are thinking that well. And believe it or not, another company that's doing that is BMW, which has a similar service called Drive Now. This company sells performance cars, fun cars to drive, making a 90-degree turn towards a world of cars that drive themselves and that you don't even own and buy by the ride is remarkable if they can pull it off. Fiat Chrysler was actually pretty much in last place until about a few weeks ago when they got one simple deal announced with Google where Chrysler will make 100 of these minivans for Google's 4th generation vehicle. Now, it's just a purchase order for now, but at least it takes them out of last place. Ford, among the American car companies, actually doing more advanced stuff, although I'm going to tell you about GM in a second. The Japanese will come next. Nissan has had this lab near us in Silicon Valley for a couple of years, and Toyota has had a number of projects as well. But Toyota actually, just in January, devoted $1 billion to an AI research fund for transportation. They're hoping to do grand things there, although they may be late in the game. The other Japanese have done very little. And this joke's already been made today about this Norwegian concept of trust. But there is another German company that's going to have a problem convincing people to trust their lives to their software. I mean, why would they lie? Which is sad, because in their Audi division, they've actually done some of the most interesting work, and they've done a lot of great projects. In fact, though, to help them out, in the United States, I've heard people say, it's terrible what Volkswagen's doing, good thing I have an Audi. Right? So, hey, brand differentiation can work, what can you say? The Koreans I then put forth, this is Hyundai, committing to spending tens of billions of dollars over time on the research and the factories to make this happen. Then the suppliers are also all in the game, especially the car companies who haven't done anything are going to have to depend on these companies like Continental and TRW. Delphi made this car drive across the United States last year from California to New York. And they announced it had driven itself about 99% of the time. Now that sounds pretty cool, really, that they've managed to achieve that, until you realize the real goal is to drive 99.99999% of the time, which is not 1% harder. It's 10,000 times more. Not that it takes 10,000 times as long, thanks to the way computer research works, but a long way to go, but nonetheless strong interest from all of these companies. Now, there are non-car companies going on as well. These vehicles are already for sale. They're made in the high-tech nation of France, and they are out there driving on campuses. That's how they manage to stay safe and not go very fast, but they mix in with other vehicles and pedestrians and traffic and take people from place to place with no controls. Just looks like the shuttle you might see, but with no driver inside it. So this is not science fiction. This is a product, not a concept car for 2020 like so many of those other companies put forward. And then this company is rumored to be doing it. They have not said. They never say anything, but leaks and rumors tell us Apple's looking at an electric car with self-driving ability in 2019. I have learned one secret about this car. You'll be able to buy it, but it will only work with the iPhone. So, you know, that is a joke, but it might not be false. I just want to warn you about that. Across from you, in Britain, they've already changed the regulations nationally to allow this technology, and these vehicles are running around a suburb of London. A new set will be running around Greenwich later this year, and then 2 other British cities, and this is expanding quite rapidly as they change their laws there. In the United States, this startup done by friends of mine is actually going to also automate big trucks, long-haul 18-wheel trucks, and get them to drive without drivers across the long routes in the United States. They're not the only ones. Freightliner, a unit of Daimler, has also been doing that. But then let's step to Google, because I didn't mention them and I worked on this team, so I have a bias, but they've now achieved actually a bigger number than on the slide, 2.3 million kilometers of autonomous driving, not just on highways, but on city streets doing door-to-door operation, and that's a big difference. It's more than everybody else put together and times a bit. And it's a lead from several years of working on it. So they're the one to bet on for now, although nothing is assured. There are new technologies coming all the time that will make this happen. Now, I want to show you with Google, actually, their 3rd generation vehicle.
Oh, isn't that cute? Okay, Eddie, here we go.
Notice the dog.
There's no steering wheel in the way.
So if I had a self-driving car, I could spend more time hanging out with my kids or helping them with their homework, even just tending to them, finding out how their day was and not having to wait till you get home and have dinner and all that. So it'd be good.
Human feeling of it is very well engineered, and it is very smooth. There's nothing that makes you feel the least bit threatened.
There's nothing that makes that gentleman feel the least bit threatened. But trust me, to the car companies, even though that car looks cute and silly and like a little koala bear, it is the biggest threat to those car industries. Notice some things about it. You saw the dog, no dashboard, not just no steering wheel or pedals. For Google, why do you want an infotainment system in your car? I've got my music with me already in my pocket. I don't want a separate system for that. I don't want something for navigation and all the other things car companies sell me. So, be very afraid is actually the message to the car companies about radical different thinking about cars, and we'll get into more of that. And in particular, we'll talk about this company. This was just released 2 days ago. It is the test car that Uber is running around their research headquarters in Pittsburgh. And it's kind of bulky right now, but Uber is the #1 brand in the world in selling rides. And it's done this in just 6 years, but it's managed to get there. I believe that the future of the automotive industry is going to be about selling rides and not selling cars. And if that's right, it won't be a universal shift, but if that's right, these guys are in an amazing position to begin the game. Second place to them are this company, Lyft, which recently received a $500 million investment from General Motors, which also spent $1 billion to buy a small San Francisco startup called Cruise that you never heard of. I helped Cruise get going and didn't take any equity, damn it. But nonetheless, this vehicle here, which is their latest test vehicle, is built on top of the Chevy Bolt platform, a car you can't even get today, an electric car that they want to compete with the Tesla. General Motors was doing very little, and so they went and spent billions to catch up, fearing that they may already be too late, and they may be too late if this shift happens. So the numbers behind this are grand. I talked about the 1.2 million people killed every year. I can tell you a little bit about the hundreds of millions of tons of CO2 that we can eliminate. I can talk about the millions of disabled people who do not have the mobility that all of us take for granted. One of the people in that video was a blind man. He will have that mobility soon, and all the other disabled people, by which I mean you in another few years when you get older and lose some of your vision, will not be losing this mobility because of it. Ground transportation around the world in cars is about a $5 trillion industry, the third largest in the world. It is all up for grabs because of computers and digitization. Now, one thing that made this happen is the sensor you saw on top of the car. This is an old version, which is a bit big and clunky and expensive, but its message is important. This is called a LiDAR. LiDAR is a light radar. It sees by reflecting light off of objects and timing how long the light takes to get back. That means it sees the world in a superhuman way in 3 dimensions. Not the fake 3D we get from having 2 eyes, but a real 3 dimensions. And over on the right, you'll see the laser scanning the road, these circles, and these clouds of dots are not very high resolution, but you and the computer can see their cars and trees and poles and lines on the road and rocks and curbs and all the features of the road that get seen with the 99.99999% accuracy that's necessary to beat human beings at safety, not seeing the way human beings sees, as I said. You combine that with other things. Radar is another popular sensor, sees through the fog, sees a bit further, sees how fast things are going. And all of that together makes the vehicle work. Now, my favorite feature on Google's vehicle are these wing mirrors. Is that what you call them here in Norway? You'll notice the car has no steering wheel, but it has side view mirrors. That's because regulations require all cars have to have wing mirrors. They don't require the brakes or the steering wheel, but the mirrors certainly have to be there. That may be a taste of something negative in the future, but for now, let's look at the future. And if you've ridden in Uber, how many of you have ridden in an Uber or something like it? I know you don't have it in Ålesund here, but you have it in Oslo and you have it in a few other places. Picking up a mobile device, saying you want to get somewhere, something pulls up very quickly, runs on the roads we have now and gets you there. Maybe if you're alone, though, it has a desk and a screen to work. Maybe if you're with friends or family, it has seats that face each other for discussion or family time or work. And it does it on the roads we have now without taking productive time out of your day. Now, a vehicle that can do this, that can run unmanned and pick you up, can do 4 things for us. It can drive you around and keep you safer. It can deliver cars to you. It can refuel or recharge itself. And it can store or park itself, as we used to call that. Now, those last 3 in particular have some big changes for other industries and the way we live and our cities. Let's look at energy, which is a somewhat important topic in Norwegian circles. Today, the car industry is driven by one big question when people walk into a dealership. They ask themselves, what car do I need for my life? Because I'm going to buy this car for 5 years. It's got to do everything I want a car to do. If I go out skiing a few times a year, I need this SUV. I spend most of the time in that SUV going to buy milk, but I must have an SUV to go out to the hills. It has 4 or 5 seats, and I drive in it mostly with how many people? Admit it, be honest. With 1. This is how we buy cars today, though. We ask for the car that meets all of our needs, our maximal car, and we're going to have it for a while. But in the future of buying rides, the question changes to what car do I need today? What car do I need for this trip? Then the answer is very different, because that one-person lightweight car, that small car that would very efficiently get you across town, is a great choice for 80% of your trips where you are alone and you're going across town. When you are going skiing with your friends, of course, drive an SUV, and the SUV only drives to the mountains, not to the milk store. And so we suddenly get rid of this giant overhang we have in our vehicles, and the vehicles become incredibly efficient and cheap. More efficient, not just than the cars we have today, but than the transit systems. And not just more efficient than the American transit systems, which suck. Not just more efficient than the Norwegian transit systems, more efficient than the Japanese trains. That's how good we can do with vehicles that are matched to the drive that people are taking. And that means huge differences in energy. It also means a big change in what type of energy powers our transportation, because robots do not care how convenient it is to recharge or refuel with an unusual fuel. Robots don't care about anything. That's the nice thing about them. And so only when you're taking a taxi, you don't care about the powertrain under the hood. Only the spreadsheet of the fleet manager cares about that, a very rational approach. And for that, electricity might be a great choice. And all the disadvantages of electricity are gone, and all the advantages of the 100-year head start that benzene has are gone as well. And so we will see a shift in the power form of the cars, and less demand for petroleum fuels and more demand for electricity, which will affect the Norwegian economy and many other things. My calculations show, in fact, that the United States, if it could do this switch, would drop CO2 by 200 million tons and end the importing of oil, which could have rather interesting geopolitical consequences, because Americans have this very annoying habit of going to war over the oil they import. And I would like to break them of that pesky habit if I could. So, governments, aside from going to war, are actually not doing what people expected. In fact, this is the Nevada first license plate for a self-driving car. Governments are jumping up and saying, me, please do this here. Because the car industry of the future might not be in Detroit or Stuttgart anymore. It might be somewhere else that a smart government can attract. And so they're lobbying for it and saying, can you please do it here first? We'll make that legally possible. Governments are even sponsoring projects in Europe, in Singapore, in China, in Japan to make this happen. And we've got people lobbying for it. We've got, of course, the disabled that I mentioned, people tired of being taxi services for their children all the time, drunks that want to get completely wasted and get home safely. And I'm of Jewish descent, so I'll mention that my Jewish friends are going to enjoy greatly arguing about whether it's legal to ride in a car like this on a Saturday or not. That's actually going to be a great deal of fun. I see a few Jews in the audience nodding at that idea. However, there are downsides. I can't do them all in a short talk, but one that I'll point out is the fact that perfection is the wrong goal, an unattainable goal here. So there will be accidents. There will be people hurt. And it's a quirk of humanity that people don't like being killed by robots. We're just funny that way. We'd rather be killed by drunks, because that's who's killing us now. I don't know why we're used to the idea that drunks kill us, but we are used to it, and we're much more afraid of being harmed by machines. And we all understand that, by the way, even though we know it's irrational. And that will cause public debate as these accidents do start appearing and people say, get these killer robots off the street, even if other evidence says they're killing fewer people than the drunks were doing when they were driving. So, we heard about Moore's Law. We saw exponential charts up on the screen this morning. Moore's Law is coming to transportation. Trust me, the industrial world has no idea what this is like. Even those of us in the computer business have had trouble dealing with the fact that for 50 years, everything we make gets obsolete in 2 years and gets twice as good. Well, in the future, the most important part of the car is not going to be the engine anymore. It is not going to be the nice leather seats. It is going to be the computer and the software. And those things are on the Moore's Law curve. The engine may not be. But they are on the Moore's Law curve. The thing that drives value in the car will be, and the change will be dramatic. On the right is an ad for an electric car from 100 years ago. That's how fast the industrial world moves. We're finally buying some electric cars today. We have some outside. On the left, as you know, is an iPhone which was introduced to the world 8.5 years ago. Who here doesn't have a smartphone in their pocket? Yes. That's how fast computer technologies take over the world, and you probably had one 4 years ago, actually. That's how fast that happens. And if you think, oh, cars and phones, two completely different things, never get the same pace, here's a newspaper clipping from 1928 about the death of the American horse and buggy industry. And in 2 years, that dropped from 500 companies to 200 companies, and 2/3 of the output went away. The car industry pushed its own predecessor off a cliff 90 years ago, back when the pace of change was much faster than today, right? No. Trust me, big things can happen, and faster than you would expect. And we have very different approaches being taken by the various players who are trying to make this happen. I describe it in this way. I say the car companies are taking an evolutionary approach. They take what they have now, they take cars, they know how to make them very well, they put computers in them to make them safer and to drive them. And I think the high-tech companies, the non-car companies, are sort of viewing it in a revolutionary way, forgetting the legacy and saying, let's take a computer, put wheels on it, and see what happens. It's the same thing, but it's two different styles and paces of innovation. I come from the computer industry, so you can guess which one I'm a fan of. But I think there's a lot of history to back up that the pace of innovation in high tech dwarfs the pace of innovation both in the industrial world and the infrastructure world. Now, by the way, I should mention some other parts of our society which are maybe even bigger than the automotive industry, see big change. I already talked about the oil industry, and there was brief touch on this morning, that these vehicles would not park in the way we think about it. If they're taxis, they would go and pick up someone else. And if they are your car, they will wait for you nearby, not exactly where they dropped you off, valet style, very densely compared to the way they park today, which means we don't need most of these anymore. They are going to start emptying out, and in my dreams, they'll turn into parks. But in reality, it's going to be condo towers in most cities. I've come to accept that. But I hope we can do something better. But the other effects on real estate are going to be even grander, because if you ask a real estate investor, what's the driver of value in your business? And he'll give you this joke: location, location, and location. The meaning of location is going to change. The meaning of distance is going to change. Because that happened in the 20th century through the car. That happened in the 19th century from the tram. It's going to happen again in the 21st century. Where we live, how we live, what land is valuable is going to change because of this. And then another industry, and this one I'm actually working on, because I'm working with actually a Baltic company, and we are trying to solve this problem. And I'll start by telling you that around the world there is one product from Italy that is so important that no matter where you are and no matter when it is, you can get it in 30 minutes. What about the ability to build not self-driving cars that cover passengers, but self-driving boxes that carry cargo, boxes that can bring you anything in 30 minutes, not just a pizza? So that's what we're building, and this robot here runs on the sidewalk, doesn't go very fast, cannot kill a pizza, and therefore doesn't have to have the same safety constraints, doesn't have to be in a hurry, step off the sidewalk if someone is walking by. You'll be able to order 5 pairs of shoes from a store, try them on, and put 4 pairs back on the robot to go home. You'll be able to order anything and get it cheaper, faster, less congestion, less accidents, less energy than the way we do it today. This is going to make big differences for retailing of all levels. It's going to make big differences even for whether we own stuff. Because indeed, do you have to own something if you can get it in 30 minutes? Maybe not. Maybe not everything, but some things, depending on how small your apartment is, at least, and that depends on where you live. I should also point out that the car transportation is going to be very, very cheap, eventually down to a cost of perhaps 30, maybe 20 euro cents for a kilometer, which is much cheaper even than a bus ticket. And boy, compared to an Oslo bus ticket, it's really, really cheap. So here is a list of a dozen industries that I think will see major change because of this technology. And yes, we start with the automotive industry, and I touched about the energy and oil industry. But in fact, there are industries that are governed by transportation that you may not have thought that way. In real estate, we touched on. Did you think about the insurance companies who will find, as people are not dying in car crashes, that suddenly they will not have the same insurance premiums to charge? And by the way, in a happier note, the doctors will also be able to make that positive declaration. 3.9 million visits a year to emergency rooms in the United States because of car accidents. That will help us get more capacity in those emergency rooms. Transit is going to also go through a change, and we can get into the details of that in discussion afterwards if you would like to. Two that are a little less apparent, but I thought you might find interesting, are media, particularly radio, so drive time radio. It exists because you have to keep your eyes on the road while you commute. And you won't have to do that anymore, so you'll be listening to podcasts or probably consuming other media in that extra hour a day that car owners currently give to their car, which they're going to get back. And then apparel is a new one I added to the list just recently, because I learned that throughout the history of the modern world, over the last 100 years, the percentage of people's money that they spend on clothing has gotten in half over the century, and it was transportation that largely took it away. And the reason is, as you said in the beginning, a lot of people do associate their vehicle with status, and they buy a vehicle to represent themselves and their status, and they're going to own it for several years. But in places in the world, like Hong Kong, where you don't own cars, I discovered everybody dressed a lot better than me. Now, that's not very hard, but they dressed a lot better than you too, and the reason is that they don't have a car or a big apartment, so they express their status in what they wear. And so when we shift to a taxi world, as many cities already have done even before these cars, we might see a shift in how people spend that portion of their income. So that list goes on, and it's so grand, and the numbers are so huge, with trillions of dollars, billions of tons of CO2, and millions of lives, that I've compared it to the grandeur of the Apollo project. So I'm going to butcher the words of the famous American President John F. Kennedy and say to you this: this nation should set itself the goal, before this decade is out, of a computer driving a man to lunch at noon and returning him safely to work. All right, maybe having a Canadian do a Kennedy impression to a group of Norwegians wasn't the best idea. But Kennedy said something else in these talks that I really liked. He said, some projects are worth doing not just because they're easy, but because they're hard. This is one of those projects. It's challenging. There are still things to resolve. There are brilliant people working on it. They're going to succeed, and they're going to change the world. Thank you very much. Now, before we get to our panel, I think the best part of it is always if we can become interactive. So I would like a chance to get some questions in our remaining minutes from the audience. So please stick up your hand. Don't be shy. You can ask any question, unless you ask me the one about the car running over 2 grandmothers versus 3 babies. It won't be stupid. And you can even ask that one if you have to. So please feel free to, if you have a question about where this is going for Norway or for the world, please go ahead and put your hand up. Or are Norwegians all really shy? Boy, I've met a lot of Norwegians who are not shy. So yes, we have a young woman up the front there. Can we run a microphone over to you? Stand up. That way they'll know you.
The whole talk is exciting to start to think about these possibilities. So I'm just... Yes, from Molde University College. It's very exciting to hear this idea. So I'm wondering, how far do you think we are from this kind of reality that you have presented? Because, we are heading in that direction.
Yes. Well, I showed you, for example, the French vehicle that's already for sale and on the roads in limited capacity. So this decade, you will see pilot projects coming out from a variety of different companies. And as I said, next year, in theory, you can just go over to Göteborg, right? And you'll see it. And you'll see pilot projects in Silicon Valley and in China, in London, in places around the world, but not necessarily in your town. But during that period of the next few years in the 2010s, these pilot projects will run out. They'll start proving the models. They'll prove the safety. They'll test the regulations. And then they'll start proving the business models, like how do you make money from it. When that gets settled, when people see a clear path to that, well, it's huge, because if you sell rides rather than cars, you're selling everything. You're selling the car, you're selling the fuel, you're selling the maintenance, the insurance, the parking. The entire value chain of ground transportation is yours to own. So there will be a land rush. Companies around the world will raise all the capital they can or already have and try and grab territory. And one company say, we got to be the first one to have Oslo, and the other company needs to be the first to have New York. And that will happen during the 2020s. That's my rough time frame prediction for when you see it happen. All right, the next question. We have one more at the front.
Thank you. My name is Jens, designer from the Volkswagen country, Germany. Same as Pellegrino.
You're not from Volkswagen itself, are you?
No, definitely not.
Because I made some fun of
But
that.
I'm a car enthusiast, and so the same as Pellegrino, I love Alfa Romeo and Lamborghini. a question directly to you. What was the strategy behind to make the design so silly and so that it is very easy for the German industry to ignore it? So perhaps
Exactly.
It's a great question.
Exactly.
That's a great question.
So have you read a book called The Innovators Dilemma by Clay Christensen? Has anyone read this book here? I'm surprised. In Silicon Valley, they have guards that don't let you come into Silicon Valley until you've read that book. And it talks about how industries get replaced, and it's almost always by things that look harmless and that couldn't possibly compete with me, right? And so Google's car is a test prototype. It's not their final form. It turns out there's an American regulation that says if you keep the car electric and under 25 or 40 kilometers an hour, that you can build it much more easily, a lot fewer regulations about how to build it. So, but yes, it doesn't look frightening, but it should be frightening. And actually, when you see General Motors spending $2 billion in a hope to catch up, you actually know that they've seen through the ruse and they think that they need to be afraid. So don't expect. But the other thing I would like to point out is one of the most successful new cars in a couple decades is the Toyota Prius, which is ugly as crap, right? And you're right. It was a radical different design, but people buy the Prius. In fact, the Prius outsells all the other hybrids, including the Camry, which is a much better selling car as a non-hybrid, because everyone wants to drive around in their Prius and say, look at me, I'm saving the world, I'm not killing it like you, right? But that's what people want. And so I think the first people to ride in these are going to say, I want this thing to look as freaky as it possibly can, so everyone can see I'm way smarter than they are.
Okay, you mentioned the iPhone example, and I suppose a part of this success is that it is also beautiful. And so imagine this Google car would be beautiful. I could imagine that we all have, maybe since years, the real demand to have it. And I agree with Pellegrino, I'm still not attracted by it, so maybe I have to wait.
You don't have to be attracted by it because you're not going to be asked to go and take it on to a date or to the opera opening, or to ride the coast, or drive through the fjords in a sports car. It will take you to the fjord, where you then step into a Lamborghini, if that's what you want, and drive it. Horses are still there today. They're used for recreation, not for commuting anymore.
But by the way, I drove the Tesla in the lunch break instead of eating. It was a great experience to drive it over the Atlantic way. Because it is...
You took it all the way to the Atlantic Road?
Yes.
Wow!
It was quite
You have
quick.
to make the ferry go a lot faster.
No, I mean the small bridge here. It looks for me like that. Thank you.
I'm saying the Tesla's faster than I expected if you pulled that off. All right.
Brad, you know you're coming back for another panel discussion.
We're doing the panel, but we're going to get one more in because we... I see you're not shy anymore. You're not shy anymore. All right, one more over there, and that'll be the last one.
That's me, I guess, yeah. Hi, my name is Mark Calloway. Very interesting presentation. You've covered, I think, extremely well this idea around road transport. Have you seen any initiatives or any ideas where it becomes a little bit more global in terms of intermodal transport, ship, road, air, etc.?
Indeed. Now, I have a vision we don't have time for what city transportation looks like, where instead of having large vehicles, what we use today for city transportation, which run on fixed routes and fixed schedules, that's how buses and trains work, to something that's more ad hoc and on demand. A computer simply notices there are 30 people here who want to get there, and it makes it happen with a mixture of single-person vehicles that bring them together, and then vans which take them together on the road, saving space. And that's one vision. But another vision, which we'll be able to connect to in just a few minutes, is to imagine that these are an ideal technology to feed something like the Hyperloop, which will take you at 1,000 kilometers an hour over a longer distance, but that last kilometer can be served well by something like this. On the other hand, this is going to be so cheap and nice and door-to-door that outside of rush hour, or a very long trip like the Hyperloop gives you, most people will indeed prefer this to any other type of transportation because it's going to be low cost, cheaper than the bus, personal, door-to-door, on demand, no parking hassles, none of those things removed, and no need for you to drive it. So it is bad news for those sorts of short to medium transportation, possibly good for airplanes and Hyperloops in long-term transportation, and possibly a revolution for how we do rush hour when we have so many people all wanting to share the road at once. So I could give you a much longer answer to that, and maybe we'll get into that in our panel later on this afternoon. But otherwise, thank you very much again.
Great, Brad. Excellent. Thanks,